Hi, so I'm Fran Gallagher. I am an intuitive leadership coach, and I have brought together a group of people who are interested in talking with all of you out in the world about ancient wisdom and modern innovation. And I'd like everyone to introduce themselves. And when you do, please say where you are. I am recording from Parker, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. So let's go in alphabetical order, please. That's you, Bunky.
Oh, my name is Bunky Lundberg. I am also in Parker, Colorado, about 30 minutes south of the city of Denver, and am excited to be a part of this.
I'm Carrie, and I am in Aurora, Colorado, which is also just outside of Denver. And I'm excited to hear our conversation tonight.
I'm Sean Allison, and I'm an intuitive coach and energy healer, and I'm calling in from Houston, Texas.
I'm Tim Gallagher, and I am in San Francisco, California.
I'm Dr. Vidor Friedman, and I'm phoning in from Silverthorne, Colorado.
And what we're going to talk about tonight is the usefulness of an open mind. What is an open mind? How open do we need to have our minds to consider ourselves open-minded? And what are the limits of this open-mindedness? So, Sean, I believe you had a couple of questions or discussion points for us tonight. And you are muted.
Come back to me. Thank you.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this, and it's just, I don't want to open my mind to certain subjects. And other subjects I am interested in having an open mind about. So, is there such a thing really as an open mind? Aren't we bringing a bias and a set of preferences to whatever interests us? And how do we gauge the openness of an open mind? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's another term, beginner's mind, which I think is sometimes a better description of what we're talking about. It's not that you're open to everything, but you're interested in how things are and you're willing to uh, look at new stuff. We all come with our biases, we all come with our programming, we all come with our experience. But somebody who has an open mind or a beginner's mind is willing to look at something fresh or as fresh as they can. So that's one way of looking at it. And it's an important concept uh, for learning. I mean, it just is.
I love it. Thank you. The beginner's mind concept is really powerful. You know, I'm also interested, often but not always, in what other people are interested in. So my dad he had dementia at the end of his life. And he taught me how to talk to him because he didn't know what day it was. He wouldn't be able to say my name. And people would embarrass him and ask him, they would point at me, do you know who this is? And he had love in his eyes for me. He recognized me, but he couldn't name me. And I thought it was awful when people did that. But what my dad taught me was to say to him, what have you been thinking about lately? And so whenever I would visit him, which was as frequently as I possibly could, he was in another city, in another state, I would say, have you been thinking about lately? And I like to ask people, it used to be, what books are you reading? What is interesting to you? one time I had a boyfriend and we went to a business networking event. And there was a man there, and my boyfriend, I thought, was being horrible. He was avoiding this one man who had come to the networking event, and the man was standing alone. So I went up to the man and I engaged in a conversation with him and was really pleasant and went on for a little while. And afterward, this boyfriend came up to me and he said, "What did you talk about?" And the boyfriend had said that this man was an asphalt contractor and he didn't want to talk to him. And I said, "Well, I talked to him about asphalt." So I love to talk to people about what interests them, but if they have anger and hatred associated with what is interesting to them, then I don't really want to hear about it. I want to hear about what is exciting, what makes them happy, what is fascinating to them. So I'm already funneling some of what I'm willing to bring beginner's mind to.
But a beginner's mind or open mind doesn't mean that you have to interact with everything. You can be discerning about what it is that you wish to learn and what it is that you're willing to enter into. So I don't think those two things are, in opposition to each other at all.
So it's where we're willing to bring beginner's mind to the subject.
Right.
So I don't want to be tutored on a political viewpoint, for instance, that I am not interested in, that I don't share.
Right.
So here's an interesting question. What type of cultural or social influences can we shape our questions to gather new information?
It's a good question, Sean. Do you have an example?
Give me some time to think about it.
We'll all think of that. I think we have to acknowledge that we all come to the table or to the moment, to the present, with a body of experience that creates filters in our mind. Our minds can only hold on to about 5 concepts at the same time. Only our conscious minds can only hold on to about 5 things at once. And so we filter our experience of reality, and I'll put that in quotes, because we all see it differently. So for each of us, reality is a little bit different. But we filter our experience of that reality through our experience and our cultural biases and all those things. So it's an important point, Sean.
Speaking of a cultural influence rather than a bias, I read a lot about the history of China at one time, and I read a lot about pre-communist China and post-communist China. And during Mao's, shall I say, leadership, the peasant culture was idealized. And so because of that, peasants who worked in the rice fields, they yelled a lot to one another in conversation, from what I read. And because they would be spread out over a rice paddy. And so long ago, golly, maybe 50 years ago, less than that, I worked in a lab, and there was a researcher from communist China who came to visit the lab and tour the lab. And she yelled. She spoke in a very loud voice the whole time that she was visiting the lab. And everyone was just so, the Americans were just so taken aback by this. And I, being the know-it-all that I can be, was explaining that the communist culture really had weighted that heavily, that if you acted like a peasant and you yelled, you were safer than anybody who at all appeared to be an intellectual, because it was an anti-intellectual bias that was present in that culture. So it was interesting to see how people literally pulled back from this woman. They weren't open to her or her culture.
I'm
for me-
curious. I'm curious, Vidor, about is there something that has been defined as a beginner's mind?
Well, it's so when you think about learning, when you learn anything, there are 4 stages to learning. There's you're unconsciously incompetent is where you start. You don't know that you don't know.
Okay.
And then you move on to consciously incompetent. You know you don't know. And then you move on to consciously competent. If you're thinking about it, you can do it right. And then then mastery is the last level, which is you don't have to think about it, you just do it, but you do it right. And I think the beginner's mind is the concept that we want to always be open to learning. We can decide not to take a lesson or not to learn something. That's okay. But in order to learn, you have to acknowledge that you don't know it all. And if you don't know it all, that's where beginners start. And so I think does that help, Monkey?
So just a second. So correlating to your 4 stages, beginner's mind would be consciously incompetent. You
Or-
know you don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really the second step because,
No, that's what I'm saying, that it correlates to the beginner's mind correlates to the second step.
right. You accept that you don't know everything.
So
The
one of the
reason-
questions that come to mind is what draws appreciation from what I'm hearing? So I like to look at questions that build curiosity and questions that build appreciation from what I'm listening to.
And then you were going to speak, Bunky?
The reason I asked the question about the beginner's mind is that many, many years ago, when I was starting a business, it was very difficult for me to acknowledge to anyone how little I knew about what I was doing. And I had an amazing coach who taught me about just continuously saying to myself, I am a beginner. And I'm thinking how I could relate that to an open mind. That if I am someone, I consider myself quite open-minded about a lot of things, but I'm sure we could touch upon things that I would all of a sudden realize that I'm not open-minded at all. But to think in terms of a beginner's mind, and then to put that into words and say, I am a beginner. Think about the permission that gives you as a human being. Instead of pretending and putting forth a facade that says I have it all together, when in fact I have none of it together, instead acknowledging that I'm a beginner, and wow, there is so much that I can learn by acknowledging that. I really like the beginner's mind.
And that's a term that comes from Zen, right, Avidor?
Yeah, it comes from Zen and Buddhism. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those concepts that, we're typically taught in our society that you want to become an expert and that you want to be competent and confident. But if we want to grow and expand, we have to be willing to be beginners again. We have to be willing to start the growth of a new branch or a new path. And so if you only stick to the stuff that you're comfortable with, it's very hard to grow.
Yes. Tim, you unmuted.
Yeah, there's something about open-mindedness and beginner's mind that I want to focus on that I think is very important to that, and that it's in contradistinction to beliefs. Beliefs are the opposite of open-mindedness because beliefs make us think that we know. You know, human beings thought they knew that the Earth was the center of the universe and of the galaxy for quite a while. And so they weren't open-minded. In fact, they were hostile to Copernicus to the point where they, you know, did awful things when they suggested that the sun was the center of the galaxy. So a really important part of having an open beginner's mind is not believing your beliefs, questioning your beliefs. And that's hard work. That is not easy because most of us are programmed to have beliefs and hold on to them for dear life and identify with them, whether they're political beliefs or spiritual beliefs or anything. So having an open mind and a beginner's mind really means that you're, as Sean said, you're curious, you want to know, and you're willing to put the work into questioning your beliefs. To me, that's the most important thing about having an open mind.
That's powerful. I like that. And I love the idea of linking curiosity with beginner's mind or open-mindedness. Thank you, Sean.
That just one more question that flows well with this thought is how can we create a safe and supportive environment to explore unfamiliar emotions and experiences?
That's beautiful. You know, I studied for many years with Sanaya Roman, the late Sanaya Roman, and Dwayne Packer. And I used to go to their meditation retreats, and there would be several hundred people in a ballroom, and we would be meditating using guided visualization for about 8 hours a day. And what would happen when you're meditating that much and you're being introduced to new concepts throughout those guided visualizations, there would be a lot of confusion. And Dwayne Packer used to say all the time, confusion is a very high state. And if you think of the most obnoxious a-hole that you've ever known, and I used to always use the example of Archie Bunker in All in the Family, but that's from a long time ago, so people won't know what I'm talking about. But if you know someone who's really obnoxious, they're never confused. They have an answer to everything that is often a put down. So if you think about allowing some curiosity that could lead to some confusion about what you have held dear as the truth, the beliefs you have held. I love that you brought it to beliefs, Tim. That it requires, that is an open mind.
And if we want to contrast open-mindedness, you know, belief is one thing, but another one is dogma. So people who are dogmatic are very, very confident in their stance. It may have no relationship to anything other than their stance, but they're very, very confident in it. And so dogma is closed-mindedness. You've made up your mind, nothing's going to change it. And that's a fragile structure. It's brittle. And so open-mindedness allows you to be flexible and look at things from different perspectives and gain more insight into what you're experiencing.
You know, that reminds me of open-ended questions, which may be another topic for another week. However, I liked how they are gathering information and opening up possibilities.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I'm thinking about as we're talking, and both the Tim bringing up belief and Vidor, you bringing up dogma, it's taking me back to absolutes that I was taught as a very, very small child that I still fight with them in being as old as I am, that they come into my mind and that they are refuting things that I would like to be open-minded about. And so it's an internal battle that goes on. I don't know if you can relate to that, but
Well,
it's very,
I'm sorry, I want to grab
Oh.
your comment, Carrie, because I saw that you had unmuted.
It's sort of along the lines that Bunky was just talking about. I grew up in a very close-minded family. There was one way, and that was the only way. And there was no room for new ideas. There was just the one way, and that was it. And so my active rebellion was open-mindedness. My like big active rebellion was to like, and it wasn't, I didn't start out looking to be open-minded. I exposed myself to situations and people that were completely off limits as set by my family. And so I got to see how other people lived, and I got to see what it looked like in other families, and I got to have experiences on purpose because I was trying to not be my family. And now I'm an adult who like puts myself in situations where I'm around people who are very different than me or seemingly very different from me. Often they're not quite as different as one might anticipate. But like I have learned from homeless men things that I never learned in a classroom and never ever could. Like things about life. And I think the way that I practice open-mindedness is that I continually put myself in the path of things that will likely surprise me. And a lot of that comes from the fact that I grew up in a place where it was very close-minded. It was very ist. It was racist. It was sexist. It was ist. And I just wanted my life to look so much different than that. And so I've sought different people, and it has served me incredibly well.
I love what you said, Carrie, because I was raised with that also. And my dad made a very big mistake. He preached a lot of racism, and then he had me go to an inner city school in St. Louis. And so I learned that what he was talking about was not true. So similar to you, Carrie. And I feel like the dysfunction and what I believe was abuse and neglect in my family of origin was fantastic because it caused me to question what I was taught. I questioned my beliefs. I questioned what was handed to me, and I explored things. Now, of course, I was very naive, and there were some issues with walking out into the world with a lot of curiosity at the age of 13 or whatever. But I'm grateful for it.
Just commenting on what the last few people have said. And circling back to what I said earlier, the problem with beliefs is that we often don't think that they're beliefs. We think that it's knowledge. And
Good
so
point.
as Avidor was talking about, that's dogma. When you think, well, I already know that, I don't have to have an open mind. It's the questioning of what you think you know. And a lot of what we think we know, we get from our conditioning, we get from our programming as children. As Carrie was talking about, it's what your family teaches you. And even if you rebel against your family, and I don't think this applies to Carrie, but a lot of people go in the opposite direction because they don't like their family. And, and also what Fran was saying, those can turn into beliefs and then knowledge as well. And you become closed-minded around that because you don't like the way your family was and you're not willing to consider there might be some truth in that. So we have all kinds of attachments and aversions to knowledge based on our conditioning. And so questioning your knowledge and your beliefs means questioning your attachments, questioning your conditioning, questioning everything. So
Yeah, one of my mentors, who's some of the other people on this call know, used to say that there's three piles of things in the universe. There's the things that I know to be true. There's the things that I know to be false. And then there's the things that I'm not sure about. And the more that I learn, the bigger the middle pile gets. So, there's a lot of, the world is far more flexible than some people would like it to be. And there's more out there. There's more possibility than we sometimes believe.
I really like that. I remember watching an episode of The Power of Myth between Bill Moyers interviewing Joseph Campbell.
Uh-huh.
And in one of those segments, Bill Moyers was talking about the moment that he fell in love with asking questions. That a really good questions creates more questions. So if we could be safe and curious and fall in love with the uncertainty and the mystery and the discovery of it, I think we're on our way.
What a beautiful conclusion. Does anyone else want to say? I was thinking we would stop shortly. Tim, you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
yeah, just much agreement with what Sean just said, and taking what Abhidor said and even further making it more radical is the only thing any of us really know is that we exist, that we're conscious. Everything else cannot be proven. You can't prove that this is not some sort of delusion or hallucination. The only thing we really know is that we exist. And if that's not being open-minded, I don't know anything else that can be more open-minded than that.
Indeed, indeed.
Anybody else want to make a comment before we conclude?
I really enjoyed our discussion tonight. I think we could talk about this for months on end because we reached no conclusion, and I think that has a lot to do with being open-minded.
There you go.
What a wonderful way to end it.
Indeed.
Thank you for those of you who tune into this and listen to this as a recording. We're hoping that we can go live and allow for question and answer at the end of a discussion. But if you have joined us, thank you so very much. And for everybody here on the panel tonight, I'd want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for participating. And good night from Parker, Colorado.
Good night.